بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وبارك على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we reach our next topic in relation to a zakah, which is zakah fil urud. Zakah fil urud, yani urud al-tijara. So the zakah which is paid in relation to yani the merchandise that is owned with the intent of tijara, commerce, buying and selling, trading. And so Ibn Qudamah rahimahullah begins by mentioning ولا زكاة فيها حتى ينوي بها التجارة وهي النصاب حولا. And so he mentions that there's no zakah which is paid upon the urud al-tijara, yani upon this commerce, until he has the intent to use it for trade. Na'am, as well as it has reached the nisab and the time period has elapsed, and the year has elapsed. And so the Shaykh Fawzan Hafidahullah, he mentions and he lays out that this is, there are specific shurut for this, as mentioned here by Ibn Qudamah. The first of them is yanwi biha tijara. So the first of these conditions is that he intends by way of it to trade. So he has the commerce and he intends to use it to trade. The second is that the time period has elapsed. And then the third is that it has reached the qima, the amount and the value of the nisab. And so these are the three conditions that need to be fulfilled if the person is to pay the zakah upon urud al-tijara. So then, just to make this clear, if a person owns a property, but they live within the property, do they need to pay zakat upon it? If it's, of course, it will reach above the nisab, a property for the most part. If they intend to sell it, to buy a new property. If they live in it, then no. Because there's no intent to? No. There's no intent to trade. But if, as you mentioned, they intend to sell it to, for example, to take that money or to liquidate the asset, so that they can trade with it. So the intent with having that asset, for example, the property, is for tijara, then it has to be regarded as being within that zakah. Because the intent of having that property, intent of having that asset is for tijara. So a person may own something, but if the first of these conditions we mentioned is that the person has the intent to trade with it. The second condition is what? Has to reach the nisab. If referring to the nisab of what? Which nisab? That's not nisab. The nisab is the amount. The whole is the time period. So referring to the nisab of dhahab or fidda. So when we say nisab in relation to urud al-tijara, merchandise or something that is an asset which is used for trade, then it's referring to the nisab for dhahab or fidda. Nisab for athman, as we referred to. Naam. The third is that the time period elapses that they have this merchandise above that amount. Naam. And so إذا بلغت أقل النساب من الذهب والفضة أخرج زكاة من قيمتها. And so as mentioned, if it reaches the least amount of the nisab for dhahab or fidda. Naam. Why is it important that I mention dhahab or fidda? Why is it important that it mentions the nisab for dhahab or fidda? Why?
Because they can be calculated.
It can be calculated. But why specify dhahab or fidda?
The value of the gold doesn't go down.
It can go down.
That's
To differentiate between what though? Because the nisab is not always the same. Sahih? So nisab can be nisab for dhahab or fidda. It could be the nisab for the an'am. It could be the nisab for cattle. It could be nisab for the thimar, the crops. So they specify with urud al-tijara to differentiate from all the other types of nisab. That the nisab for it is for the dhahab al-fidda. Now to differentiate between the two. Except if what?
We trade in those.
Except if you're trading in those things where they have another nisab. So say, for example, your trade is crops. Your urud al-tijara are the crops. Then the nisab will be in relation to the crops. If your urud al-tijara is in relation to the cattle, then it will be in relation to the cattle. Makes sense? But if you generally own merchandise, then the urud al-tijara will be the dhahab al-fidda. Naam. Make sense? Naam. So the aqal, the least amount. Naam. And so it goes to mention وإن كان عنده ذهب وفضة ضمهما إلى قيمة العروض في تكميل النصاب. And so if he has ذهب and he has fidda, نعم, or ذهب or fidda, and he has along with that عروض التجارة, then he places them together until it reaches that nisab. So he doesn't look at them as separate entities, essentially. Naam. So if you have dhahab, you have fidda, and then you have urud al-tijara, the person doesn't say, okay, because I haven't reached the nisab in my dhahab, there's no zakah. But if you was to put the dhahab, the gold, along with the urud al-tijara, his merchandise, if you was to place it together in terms of its value, then it would have reached that amount, that had. If you do that, then the person has to pay the zakah upon that. Naam, does that make sense? So they're not treated as separate entities. Why? Because essentially the urud al-tijara is as if it is dhahab al-fidda. Naam, it's as if it is dhahab al-fidda. Naam. طيب. And so if the person does not intend by way of it, does not intend by way of the tijara, or intend by way of having this object, trade, then he continues to have it and hold on to it for that period of time. And so that period only begins as soon as he intends to trade with it. The period of time begins as soon as he intends to trade with it. So, for example, a person owns a car. Now, a person owns a car. And he doesn't intend to trade it. It's just his car. Naam. However, now he's deciding that he's going to go into business buying and selling cars. And it so happens he's going to begin by selling his car. That's where his tijara is going to begin with, his personal car. As soon as he's made that decision, naam, and he has the azima to now sell that car, tijaratan, to sell that car as a means of his business, naam, and his trade, then bada al-hawl. Then the time period begins from there. Naam, meaning what?
A year after he decides is when it's due.
Afwan?
A year after he decides to trade it,
Naam.
is when it starts
So after the year elapses, after that decision, that's when he has to pay the zakat upon it. So let's say he desires to sell it, but Miskeen doesn't manage to sell it in a whole year. Naam, after the year elapses, he has to pay zakat upon the value of that. Taib. Or he does decide to sell it, within a couple of months he sells it. And he still has other cars now with that same value, or cars to similar value or the likes of that. And so he's always remained above that nisab. From the time he made that decision, he sold it, and then he carries on selling cars, buying and selling cars. Naam. Then that year begins from when he made that decision. Okay? So the main darbit when it comes to urud al-tijara is the niyyah. Now the main darbit is the niyyah. That the person, as soon as he makes that intention to sell it, then this is when he has to pay the zakah upon it. Naam. As soon as he makes that intention. Allah Ta'ala knows best. And that's the discussion around the urud tijara. Alhamdulillah, it's a short discussion, short chapter. But as we mentioned, those are the three conditions. Three conditions being, the person has the intention to trade in it, the time period has elapsed, and he's reached the nisab. Now they reach the nisab of what? Dhahab al-fidda. And if they have dhahab al-fidda along with that, have to put them together. Now, what if he has cash? So is it mentioned along with that as well? Because Ibn Qudamah mentions dhahab al-fidda. Represents gold.
It reaches whatever cash you have. You use the figure, you use that gold in that to assess what you would pay because it's part of your assets.
So the gold used.
Everything's part of it.
Okay, I'm saying for Afwan, so to make clear the question, I'm saying there's no gold, there's no gold, no silver. He just has cash.
It's still a representation of it.
Representation of the gold. So if he has a certain amount of cash and then he has the asset and to put it together, it reaches the nisab, then he has to pay zakah. Everyone's nodding. Okay.
As long as it fulfills the conditions.
هذا خالف الجماعة. Now why? The urud al-tijara and dhahab al-fidda are two separate entities. No. You pay each one separately. You pay each one separately because... Okay. Because they're two separate entities, you say? No. Essentially. It's the dhahab or fidda is one. It's all one thing. So as long as they should be looked at as one essential thing. Why? Because their nisab is all the same. So they're treated as the same. So even though Ibn Qudamah mentions dhahab or fidda, the understanding from that is dhahab or fidda wa ma yulhaq bihima. So that which is ascribed and that it takes the same ruling as the two of them as well, which essentially is cash. So here, even though he's mentioning dhahab wal fidda, gold and silver, if there's no dhahab wal fidda in the equation, but there's cash in the equation, along with urud al-tijara, the merchandise, then they're placed together. So his mention of dhahab wal fidda, of course, is inclusive of everything from athman. Anything that is regarded as being from the thaman. So the zakat in relation to cash, gold, silver, any of them is placed alongside urud al-tijara. Naam, واضح يا إخوة. جيد. Thereafter, Ibn Qudamah mentions the next chapter, which is the zakat al-fitr. So he mentions zakat al-fitr. He mentions zakat al-fitr, rahimahullah, of course, in the bab al-zakah. Naam. And the reason for that is clear. Now, the reason for that is clear. Because it's zakah. It's zakah. And so, the affair of zakat al-fitr, or zakat amuman, is ibadah of the man. Any ibadah which is done with a person's wealth. And so, the fuqaha generally would mention these chapters, one after the other, pertaining to all of the ibadah which is done with the wealth, one after the other. And so zakat al-fitr is from them. So Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah, he mentions, وَهِيَ وَاجِبَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ مَلَكُ الْفَضْلِ على قوته وقوت عاليه وقوت عياله ليلة العيد ويومه وقدر فطر الصاع من البر أو شعير أو دقيقهما أو سويقهما أو من التمر أو زبيب فإن لم يجده أخرج من قوته أي شيء كان الصاع. And so, first and foremost, Ibn Qudama, he mentions the ruling of the zakat al-fitr. The ruling of the zakat al-fitr is that it's an obligation. It's an obligation upon every Muslim. And so it's important what is mentioned here, that it's an obligation upon every Muslim, because that is comprehensive of every individual, whether it be the saghir, the young, the kabir, the old, الذكر والأنثى, the male or the female, the one that is free or the one that is enslaved. It's an obligation on every Muslim that the zakah be paid. So we understand from that, it's not that it's an obligation that every Muslim pays that money. However, it's an obligation that the zakat al-fitr is paid upon every single individual, or paid on behalf of every single individual. Naam. And so, the proof of that is a hadith found in Sahih Bukhari, the hadith of Ibn Umar رضي الله عنهما, where he mentions فرض رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم زكاة الفطر صاعا من تمر أو صاعا من شعير على العبد والحر والذكر والأنثى والصغير والكبير من المسلمين، وأمر بها أن تؤدى قبل خروج الناس إلى الصلاة. And so this narration, Afwan, is found is mutafaqan alayh. It's found in Bukhari and Muslim. However, this wording is found in Bukhari. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned, or Ibn Umar rather, mentioned that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam obligated zakat al-fitr of the amount of the sa', it's a particular measurement of sa', of dates or wheat upon every slave, in every captive slave, free, male, female, young or old, from amongst the Muslims. And he commanded that it be paid and given to the people before the Salah. I referring, of course, to Salatul Eid. So this is given before the Salah. واضح? And this is what we understand is from the reasons why Salatul Eid, Eid al-Fitr, is delayed in comparison to Eid al-Adha. So Eid al-Fitr is delayed from the reason giving more opportunity for the zakat al-Fitr to be paid. and to be distributed. What's another reason it's delayed? Naam. Due to the fact that it's legislated that the person eats before leaving for Salatul Eid. Naam. And why is it legislated to eat before Salatul Eid? Naam. To make ta'qeed of the affair that they're not fasting. Naam. So it doesn't become an action where one thing leads to another and end up not eating for a longer period of time. Naam. So the first thing the person does on the sabah of Eid al-Fitr, in that morning, is that they eat something. So due to the fact that it's legislated to eat, then the salah can be delayed somewhat. Naam. Likewise as well, as we mentioned here, due to the fact of the paying of zakah, naam, wa khuruj, ikhraj al-zakah as well, the payment of zakah and giving the zakah out, its distribution, that the salah is delayed as well. And opposite to what? Eid al-Adha, where Eid al-Adha should be prayed earlier, brought forward. Naam, Eid al-Adha should be brought forward. Why? Why? Because what is legislated afterwards is the slaughtering. That which is legislated afterwards is the slaughter. And so, this is what you find from these particular actions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And so, the zakat al-fitr is legislated to be paid and paid for each and every one of these individuals. As mentioned, each and every one of them is mentioned as well. And now, thereafter, Ibn Qudama mentions that it's an obligation that this zakat al-fitr be paid, and it can be paid later to Eid. If the person has an individual that he can pay on their behalf. Naam. And so, what is understood for that is that the individual pays on others' behalf. Naam. So the individual pays the zakah upon others from the jama'ah. And this is something which is comprehensive of every individual as aqil baligh. And the individual yunfiq al-akharin, he pays the zakah upon the other individuals if that individual is from amongst his family. For example, he's mas'ul, so he's responsible for them. So when we say that, for example, the zakah is an obligation upon the saghir, upon the young, the child, then what we understand from that is that it's an obligation upon the child that is paid by the one that is responsible for them, the wali of that child. And for the most part, it'd be the father. And if we're saying that the zakah is an obligation upon the women, then it's an obligation upon the wali of the women. Again, for the most part, it might be the father or it might be a husband. Likewise, if we say the zakah is an obligation upon the abd, then we're referring to who? Who has to pay the actual zakah? The owner. Naam, the one that owns the slave. So, it may be that one individual, he spends from his wealth the zakat al-fitr upon many other individuals. Why? Because he is responsible for many other individuals. So he may be responsible for his children, his wife, and he may own slaves. And so in this scenario, it's wanting to pay zakat upon each and every one of them. Now, can the slave pay the zakat for himself? No. Why? His wealth isn't his. There's no wealth for him to pay. No, there's no wealth that he has to pay with. And so it's the wealth of the owner. Naam, his wealth belongs to the owner. Naam. And thereafter, we'll go straight to where Ibn Qudamah mentions, ويستحب عفوا يستحب إخراج الفطرة يوم العيد قبل الصلاة. So that which is recommended and the best practice is that it is paid يعني on the day of Eid, يعني Eid al-Fitr, before the Salah. And so this doesn't negate the fact that the person can pay the Zakat al-Fitr beforehand. No, it doesn't negate that. However, it is paid, يعني that which is mustahab is paid paid on the same day of Eid before the Salah. And it's sort that it's distributed as well at the same time. No. Likewise, going back, we mentioned the Zakat al-Fitr that is paid in what? How does Zakat al-Fitr paid? In يعني produce, food. So, if a person says now, I'm going to pay my Zakat al-Fitr, and generally what you find in Zakat al-Fitr, they say, okay, £3 per head, مثلا. So, and they pay it in nuqud, money. Is there an issue with that?
Not as long as they don't give it the individual. They give it like a representative who buys the food and distributes.
No. So if they give that money with the intent of that money being distributed, naam, then that's khilaf. That's khilaf al-sunnah. Why? Because the intent of Zakat al-Fitr is food. Naam, the intent of Zakat al-Fitr and the mal, I said the wealth of Zakat al-Fitr is food. So, however, if the person was to give money, yani cash, with the intent of it being exchanged for food, in order for that to be distributed, fala ba's. Why? Because the intent is that it's going to be distributed as food. If now, however, the person gives it as wealth, or as cash, and the intent is that it's going to be distributed as cash, then this, no doubt, is khilaf. This is opposition to what is mentioned. What is mentioned in the narration. And the narration mentions يعني tamr or the sha'ir. Naam. And so we understand from that there's no mentioning of the nuqud. As for zakat al-mal, now the person pays zakat al-mal, fala ba's. Zakat al-mal, so the person paying, for example, their zakah, they pay £100, مثلا. And then that zakah is going to be distributed as the same £100, la ba's. But with zakat al-fitr, it's important that it's distributed as food. That makes sense. Hence why what you find generally, the general practice is that the zakat al-fitr, generally here in the UK, for example, zakat al-fitr is collected as money and is used to buy food produce abroad, and it's distributed abroad. But there's no mania, there's no harm that the person does it here in the UK as well, where they buy the produce with that money and distribute it to the people. Now, wadih? And so each and every one of these things, then there's no harm in doing that. Then Qudamah goes on to mention, ولا يجوز تأخيرها عن يوم العيد ويجوز تقديمها عليه بيوم أو يومين ويجوز أن يؤتى الواحد ما يلزم الجماعة والجماعة ما يلزم الواحد. And so Ibn Qudamah goes on to mention some of the ahkam in relation to the distribution of the zakat al-fitr. And so thus he mentions that it's not permissible to delay it after Yawm al-Eid. Now, and so now, if the person, Sheikh Ubayd mentions, if the person delays paying it, naam, Then there are two scenarios. There's two reasons why they did so. Now, the person, if he delays paying it, he may do so due to, or it may have happened due to two reasons. The first reason, example, is kasal. So due to their laziness. So due to the laziness, they delay paying the zakat al-fitr. This individual, Shaykh Ubayd mentions, alayhi tawbah wa istighfar. Upon him is to make tawbah and to seek forgiveness. Why? Because he's opposed the commands found, the command of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and the obligation of paying the zakah. The second is a nasi. Naam, the one that forgets. He didn't pay it due to forgetfulness. What could yahsul? It could occur. For example, the person's busy, then he's immersed in the ibadah of Ramadan. Naam. And he has it in his mind he's going to pay the zakat al-fitr. But he forgets to pay it. This scenario, alayhi al-qada wa ikhrajah. Upon him is qada. So upon him is to make up that zakat and pay it. Naam. As some Ahlul Ilm mentioned, from them a Sheikh Abdul Muslim Abad, he mentions that the one that pays it, late, then he pays it, although he's paying it to make up for the zakat al-fitr. Now, then it's only paid as sadaqah. It's only sadaqah. It cannot now be said that it's zakat al-fitr. Why? Because the time of the zakah has elapsed. The fitr has elapsed. But he still pays it. And likewise, it's permissible to precede the paying of the zakat al-fitr by a day or two. And Shaykh al-Fawzan, he mentions that this is the action of some of the companions. Naam. Some of the action of the companions that they would pay that zakat al-fitr, preceded by Eid by a day or two. Preceded by Eid by a day or two. Thereafter, Ibn Qudama goes on to mention وَيُجُوز نعم ويجوز أن يؤطع الواحد ما يلزم الجماعة. So it's permissible to give one individual the zakah of the jama'ah. So for example, a group of people is upon them to pay zakat al-fitr. Let's say مثلا it's two families. Two families worth of zakat al-fitr. It's permissible to give that to one person. فقير واحد. Now, is that clear? So one individual, he can receive the zakat of many. Naam. And likewise, it can be the opposite. Naam. That one individual can pay the zakat al-fitr and split it amongst the fuqara. So his zakat al-fitr that he pays, he splits it amongst the fuqara. He doesn't just pay it to one person. So both are permissible, and Allah Ta'ala knows best. Allah Ta'ala knows best. And alhamdulillah concludes discussion around the zakat al-fitr. We'll conclude here, inshallah. Allah Ta'ala a'lam. Inshallah, we'll have maybe 2 more lessons in regards to the zakah and end there. Allah Ta'ala a'lam. Barakallahu feekum. Wa jazakum Allahu khayra wa sallallahu wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Na'am. person intends to sell his car, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So say for example, he tends to sell it. 6 months elapses. He doesn't sell it, he says, no, I'm just gonna keep it. That intention changes now. And then the end of the year comes from when he first intended to sell it. There's nothing upon him. Why? Because that intention changed in the middle. Naam. Remember, when it comes to urud al-tijara, the main dhabit is the niyyah. Naam. And that's what differs urud al-tijara, or that's what separates urud al-tijara from other types of zakah. Naam, is what does the person intend to do with that commodity? So if he intends to trade it, then upon him in that regard is a zakah. Now, if he intends to trade it. However, if the intention changes, which I think you're talking about in that example, the intention changed now, so that darbit is no longer there. That particular rule for it is no longer there. So the person doesn't have to pay the zakah. No. Yeah. Yeah. He's working. Okay. No, that money belongs to his owner. Because that's essentially he's mamluk. He's owned. He's owned himself. So if someone's owned, they can't own anything. If that makes sense, they can't own anything of man. It's everything is owned by is the wealth of the owner. Now, so for example, his owner could say you need to go out and work. Now, for example, he might even say that. He might say that I don't have any real need for you in the home or a khidmah, yeah, in terms of the service of the home. So we to go out and work so that you can earn money for that. So we understand with slaves, they were treated as a commodity in of themselves. Nah, it's like they were treated as a commodity in terms of tijara in of itself. Just as you have any other commodity where it could be a means of increasing your wealth. Nah, so it'll be a means of increasing your wealth. So, say for example, the person has the commodity of crops. They know this they own the crops, and that could be the means of increasing their wealth by way of growing more and whatever else, or cattle growing more and the rest of that. So, when it comes to the slaves, then this is again the understanding of it is that they're a commodity, they're owned, and so they can produce money for the owner. So anything that they own, anything that they earn, let's say, they go to the owner, and then upon him is to pay zakah on that, if it reaches, of course, the conditions. No. No. Mm. If he's not unable to pay it as food, then he pays it as money. Due to if there's a hardship upon him. Why? Because it becomes, generally speaking, let's say, it's easier to pay the zakat al-fitr as food before Eid. Just the way that the setup is. Let's say, for example, Saudi. The way that the setup is in Saudi is that you have the street, now, and then there'll be a set of people selling things on the street, flour, crops on the street. Directly after that, on the same street, there'll be people in need of it. So you buy it, give it to them. You might even have to carry on driving. You might just walk down and give it to them. Now, but then of course that is something that kind of setup is only going to be there before Eid or later till Eid. Now, so maybe the day before Eid or later till Eid, you'll find that. So you'll find the lines of the streets of people selling the commodity, selling the food products, and then the people sitting there waiting for the food products. Now, if now, for example, we say the person forgot, then after Eid, it's going to be difficult to find the person sending it, as well as the person to give it to. So if the person finds difficulty in that, then they can give it. But the asl still remains, because it's qada. Now they're paying that zakat al-fitr to make up for the zakat al-fitr that they missed. They should seek to pay it in the same way that they paid it before. Right.
So is it mentioned in the hadith or otherwise about the people receiving the zakat al-fitr?
In terms of,
Who are
what we understand from it generally is that it's for the fuqara and the masakin, those that are in need of it in terms of the fuqara and the masakin. Wallah alam.
Can you give it to a non-Muslim?
To the non-Muslim for the mu'allafatu qulub, those that you're seeking to bring closer to Islam.
One of the reasons could be poor and one of the reasons.
Allah alam. I don't know.
No. Just to bring them closer.
No.
But they have to. Would they have to be poor as well?
No. Because if you give, for example, if you give zakat al-mal,
That's it.
ikhraj zakat, they don't have to be poor.
No.
So it could be the same thing.
They just use that.
And what they call here goodwill gesture. No, it's just seen as a goodwill gesture. But Allah Ta'ala knows best in terms of the ahkam of it. Allah Alam. I'm not sure. Barakallahu feekum. وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.